Hello, everyone. So welcome to this webinar today. So I hope everybody can hear me well. Today, we're here to talk about how to scale data and AI initiatives to deliver results across your organization. So my name is Anne-Laure Thiolan. I'm the Capgemini AI and Analytics Group Offer Leader, and I have the pleasure to welcome our speakers today. Jennifer Belissent, Principal Analyst at Forrester, Dinan Tinholt, Gotham Beliapa, and Melanie Brown, Vice Presidents in Capgemini Insights and Data. So if we can go to the next slide. So what we will cover today. So first, Jennifer will take us through some findings from Forrester research on how the intersection of process, data, and technology has helped organizations move from trying out POCs to delivering ROI for their business with data and AI. I'll then take you through some additional findings from our Capgemini Research Institute on data and AI-powered enterprise reports and specific recommendations on how to deliver business outcomes with data and AI across your organizations. And last but not least, we will rapidly go into real-world project examples for practical recommendations that have worked out very well for our clients. And we'll keep a few minutes at the end for Q&A, but I also encourage all of you to ask questions directly in the chat so that we can also answer them live, either when we speak or in the chat itself. So without further ado, Jennifer, over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Anne-Laure. Go ahead and move to the next slide, please. And one more. So I'm excited to talk to you today about some of the things that we're seeing at Forrester around how organizations are embracing AI. So what we hear from our survey respondents is that 68% of firms have implemented or are implementing AI. Now, at first, a lot of those were pilot projects, testing the waters, seeing how things, seeing how to use AI across a variety of different use cases. So we knew that marketing wanted to use AI to help segment their audiences and eventually enable personalization and some more targeted product offers. We knew that customer service wanted to use AI to better route calls and really understand how to match up a customer with a representative who would be most appropriate for speaking to them. Obviously, finance wanted to use AI to help better understand potential revenue leakage. Risk and security officers wanted to mitigate risks. Sales teams wanted to prioritize and vet prospects. And the list goes on and on and on. IT actually was one of the largest use cases, or one of the first use cases, improving systems and processes. And next slide. And the majority of those projects have been successful. 73% of those that we surveyed who have used AI report a positive outcome. Now, the impact of that is, as word gets out, more and more projects, more and more use cases are being proposed. Next slide. And so what that means is we've gone from 5 to 50 to 500, 5,000 different use cases across the organization that are yet to be implemented with machine learning and AI. And obviously that gets into issues of scale. How do you scale those teams that might have started out relatively small? How do you scale the use of the data as you're increasing use across these different use cases? Not only are companies looking to tap into all of their internal data resources, but increasingly they're looking at enhancing and augmenting their own internal data with external data as well. So that just increases the challenge for those teams looking at managing these particular projects. Next slide. So it's also not just a once and done proposition. Obviously, building out, identifying those use cases, identifying the data that can be brought to bear on them, building the models, delivering the insights, embedding those insights into processes or decision-making tools, that's all part of the process. But as these models get launched into production, they also have to be monitored, retrained, often remodeled. So as you can imagine, it's not just a question of those individual projects. It just escalates. It explodes in terms of the management of all of these different types of projects. So what you can see here is that you've got the business value on the vertical axis, and if that lemon is the first the business value that was generated, the one that really got everyone's attention and got people excited about the project, over time those models can degrade to the point where you might, if you leave it alone, it might end up being that moldy lemon in the back of your refrigerator. And that's really where a lot of this activity and energy needs to come in to make sure that you're ensuring that those models stay fresh and eventually maybe remodeled. So next slide. So what do we recommend that companies do in order to manage all of this at scale? So at Forrester, we talk about the insights-driven business model. If organizations really want to leverage AI, machine learning, any new techniques, and really elevate the insights, that strategic position of data and analytics within their organization, elevating insights and data to create that competitive advantage, to create that differentiation that's really going to make them stand out, they need to invest in the 4 pillars that support that strategy. And those are people, process, data, and technology. And to just touch a little bit on some of those, from a people perspective, we're seeing organizations increasingly appoint leadership. We've seen chief data officers around for a while now, but what we're seeing is now 63% of organizations tell us that they have a CDO or other insights leader. But what's changing now, in addition to the increasing numbers of insights leaders, is the mandate of those leaders. They're moving from being more focused on data privacy, security, compliance, to moving to the right across that value chain, if you think of it as a value chain, to discovery and access. So facilitating the discovery and access of the data, and eventually facilitating the use of that data and the delivery of value into the organization. So we're seeing those chief data officers, other insights leaders, really shift to the right and shift in focus towards business value. We're also seeing them build cross-functional teams. In a piece of research that I just published, we talked about how the chief data officer was that D was not just for data, but it was also for diplomacy, working very closely in collaborating across the organization to build those relationships. And then the next area that I wanted to call out within the people side of things was increasing literacy. We're seeing organizations recognize the need to up-level their employees, not just at the data leadership level, kind of at the top of that pyramid, but thinking about how do they educate their decision makers and get them comfortable with making insights-driven decisions, but also everyone across the organization, all employees, in terms of understanding and being aware of what data is in their organizations, how it's used, and what their role is. I won't go into all of these other aspects in too much more detail, but I wanted to touch on a couple of other things. From the process perspective, we're increasingly seeing organizations build out centers of excellence, bringing in representation from across those different business units. So thinking of that chief data officer as being the chief diplomatic officer, thinking of the processes they're developing as including others and bringing in that representation from others to really promote collaboration and break down some of those silos. And that leads me to the data. So we're seeing that breakdown of silos across the organization, and increasing emphasis on data sharing, but also not just internally, but also externally. So over 70% of our survey respondents tell us that they're looking to invest in improve their ability to access and leverage external data. So that could be partner data, that could be open data from governments. There's obviously a wide a wealth of data available. And we're increasingly seeing companies look to leverage that external data to enhance their ability to build those models and keep those models up to date. And then from a technology perspective, just a couple things I wanted to call out. As we're increasingly seeing the number of models that organizations are building and maintaining, those data scientists are increasingly relying on AutoML to build those models more quickly and to get them into production. And to obviously to manage that, we also see an adoption of model ops as a process for bringing all of that together. So think about all four of these pillars as we talk through some of these customer examples today. And really that's the way to ensure that you can scale effectively. Now, I'm going to pass this over to Anne-Laure to talk about some of the findings of a Capgemini study that really dug into some of these questions in a little more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer. So let me now bring indeed additional perspectives and data points that actually confirm absolutely what you just described, and Jennifer. It's from our Capgemini Research Institute, and specifically two reports, the AI-powered enterprise and the data-powered enterprise that we published last year. They're actually uploaded in the documents section of this webinar if you want to grab them, if you want to know more. So we actually surveyed 1,000 organizations on where they were in their AI initiatives, and we found that actually in 2020, more than half of them, 53% of organizations, are now somewhat in production with AI. But if you take a closer look, it seems to be a little bit difficult still. Only 13% of organizations have managed to scale AI across multiple business areas. We call them AI at scale leaders. And on the contrary, 47% of organizations that are not yet in production, and actually a big part of those had actually started before 2019 and are still struggling with no production grade applications and are stuck in POC hell with all the moldy lemons. So what we will discuss today is what you can do as an organization to move to business results out of POC hell. And the first thing to acknowledge, as you see on the right, and as Jennifer, you pointed at, it's not only about the technology. So on the next slide, out of this research, we have found 4 types of actions any organization should take in order to scale AI and deliver results. And they are indeed absolutely broader than technology. It's about operationalize AI with the right strategy, governance, and operating model. Nurture the right skills, so the people part, and also the partnerships, like you said, and the diplomacy officer, the partnerships internally to your organization, but also externally with the technology and innovation ecosystems. Empower these initiatives with the right data foundations and agile ways of working. And last but not least, it's about monitoring how things go when you're live in production in order to maximize value. So if you want, let's go one by one, and let's start actually with the foundations. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about Empower, which is data and AI platforms to give your business easy access to the data they need with the right quality so that predictions, classifications, and decisions can be trusted. And also using those data sets through agile ways of working. And for this, really, you need 3 things, actually, out of the 4 that you mentioned, Jennifer: the data, the tech, and the ways of working. And we're going to talk about the people right after. It sounds easy, but actually in one of our studies, we found that while 62% of IT executives think that their business users trust and completely rely on data for decision making, only 20% of business users are saying that they indeed do that. And on data quality, we found that IT executives consider that for 54% of them that their business users are happy with data quality, while only 27% of business users actually say they do. So for all of you listening to the webinar, whether you're in IT or business, you see that there is a perception gap that still needs to be filled and addressed. So let's see how we solve this. So first, the data. So data governance is key. We know it while we've been talking about data governance probably almost since decades now, with tools that I'm sure a lot of you use, such as Informatica, for example, covering many of the aspects you see listed here, such as data quality, lineage, master data management, metadata management, etc. Well, the good news is that you can also now explore how new technologies can help you go faster and industrialize more these processes that are very time consuming and for which you are never done. It's like, cleaning up your room. It's a continuous process. So I'm thinking of new tools such as Elation, for example, for faster data cataloging, or even knowledge graphs, actually, to help you build semantic layers to better manage patterns and connections within your data estate. So second, the tech. So of course, it's about the technology foundations and leveraging the hyperscaler stacks, as well as tools like Snowflake in order to better manage the various data silos that may still exist in our organization. And for this, the key thing is to industrialize the data foundation as much as you can. It has to become dumb. Right now, it's not yet dumb. So industrialize it as much as possible. And this is actually why we're currently working with Microsoft to build a full set of accelerators to accelerate the time to value with data platforms by 40%. And last but not least, you need the ways of working. And Jennifer, we had a conversation on that democratization topic. It's really about how your people are using the data and what are the ways of working that they use in order to exploit data for decision making, especially looking at data ops tools and frameworks, so that when you think about democratization, you consider this again as a continuous process to build, refine, and deliver data products continuously for your business users. So moving to the second action you can take, which is on the next slide, operationalize. It's really about the right aligned strategy, governance, but also above all, operating model that will ensure your business and IT teams will work in alignment to use AI to deliver business results, while ensuring the projects and use cases that they choose make sense from a human impact and ethics perspective. And here again, we have surveyed the organization where they were on this. I'm sure you have guessed there is a gap. So 56% of technology executives believe that data analytics strategy is aligned with their overall business strategy, while only 38% of business executives feel the same. And actually, the industries where the gap seems to be the widest are banking, insurance, and automotive. So what can you do about this? First of all, again, the operating model is key. Your data and AI teams have to be, as Jennifer, you said, embedded in the business. Otherwise, you will never get to a sustained alignment between the business strategy and the data strategy. So maybe it will happen, at the start of the year after the traditional kickoffs that you will have set up, but it will deteriorate over time as business priorities change throughout the year due to market changes or potential disruptions. So for this, you can set up indeed specific center of excellence and COEs embedded in the business and seek to balance global governance with local execution and proximity with the business teams. Second, this will help you prioritize and also deprioritize projects at the same rhythm that what the business needs, according to new product launches, for example, and according to specific changes in specific markets. So while you prioritize and take into account those local specificities, there are a set of common good practices that you should set up centrally. And one of them is actually ethics. It should be part of how you are operationalizing data and AI initiatives, to always look at new AI projects through the lens of the impact on humans and to ensure that you only pursue initiatives that make sense for your people, your client as a whole. And last 2 points, create accountability. You prioritize together with the business, but the business needs to always have skin in the game to ensure success. And therefore, whatever AI solutions you build in order to transform a process with data and AI, this particular business process must be adapted for the long term in order to take advantage of it. Otherwise, its impact will not be durable. So next slide, let's move to the people part with nurture. This is key for your teams to know how to use data and AI for positive impact. So different aspects to cover. First, you need to put the right leadership roles in place. And we found that a majority of AI at scale leaders, and you remember the beginning of the 13% that really managed to scale, have appointed a chief AI officer whose job is precisely to deliver tangible results with AI, working in collaboration in a diplomatic way with chief data officers, chief digital officers, and other CXOs, as you can see. And second, you need absolutely to set up training programs to deliver, to foster this data literacy, to develop skill sets for AI at scale, onboarding not only the technical profiles, such as data engineers, data scientists, and architects, but also the business users from marketing teams, legal, operations. This is the way you build successful AI solutions, where users also feel comfortable with the solutions that are being built because they understand them. And so finally, on the next slide, monitor and amplify. So this is where you realize that the success of an AI project does not stop when finally you've put it in production, because its life actually just started. This is a topic we especially saw top of mind of our clients during the first months of the COVID crisis, as the historical data sets on which prediction, classifications, or decisions were based did not reflect the sudden change in consumer behaviors, in global logistics constraints due to the lockdowns, etc., etc. And this is where we have worked with some of our clients to completely revamp, for example, their demand forecasts in order to reflect the new reality. And this has led us to build a specific solutions called AI Glassbox to continuously monitor the performance and accuracy of AI models to detect drift as early as possible. And so continuously monitoring performance of your AI solution is part really of model ops, ML ops processes that you should put in place in order to ensure that your AI solutions do not become moldy lemons, do not become deprecated over time. And it's a key part of delivering business outcomes that are always optimal, be it to better balance your channel attribution in marketing or for your supply chain planning. Now, I propose we move to some real life examples of client stories of how organizations have indeed managed to apply some of these recommendations, partially or totally, to deliver results. So over to you, Melanie, for the first example.
Thank you, Eleanor. Well, I'm happy to present, next slide, please. I am happy to present a journey that we're taking with National Grid, a leading energy company that operates both in the UK and US. When we first started working with National Grid, it was asked of us to begin to implement a master data management program, and that it was all focused on tools. But tools cannot save you if you don't first examine the health of the data. And so an example is you wouldn't wake up one day and decide to climb Mount Everest and then just do that successfully. You have to be in the right condition. So one of our first steps was looking at, as a prerequisite for any promising technology, what was the actual health of the data? And here's what we discovered. We noticed that the data was in very poor shape. We were not able to do any data quality analysis, and more alarming is that there was not really any systems of record. The data was being overwritten at any given time through subject matter experts. Also, we learned that many of individuals, while they believed that data was very important, they were spending over 60% of their time making the data work for them. So this was a huge challenge. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about the pillars of people, process, data, and technology. So often the outcomes are very focused on, but not the journey. And also the culture. What is encountered in the culture? And we were challenged with that as well. So of the culture, the people component was so critical, from upskilling and building literacy in the knowledge, and not only just in technology, but also addressing the political, rational, and emotional components that we were about to embark on in the journey. So first and foremost, we needed to establish a data foundation, and we stepped back and said, let us baseline. Let us look at the foundation of the data first and foremost and get it at a healthy state, build out that data trust. And they were willing to work with us on this journey, so that you cannot master data unless you understand and master the process. That had never been a consideration. It was only about the data. So this is a really interesting dynamics that were ongoing throughout the organization. And we also know, which is very common, the pockets of information. So one of the goals that National Grid had is that they wanted to and recognized that they need to leverage data as an asset. Fantastic. They set forth core principles that they needed to become compliant in. And a lot of it was managing and securing the environment. And they needed to establish accessibility, a publishing framework. They needed to have fit for purpose, and they needed to master their data. And yet they had no tool to do that. And they also considered mastering data as an afterthought. So we brought them back and we grounded them in understanding, building literacy along the way. And then we're developing a cloud-based solution in the Azure environment to help them do that. They work primarily only in production. We were setting up properly a dev and test environment in the cloud. So to transform the data, we were looking at it very holistically. What does that trajectory look like? To achieve higher orders of AI and analytics and to embed that into the culture, we needed to mature the environment by looking at it at a strong aspirational state, but also scale it smartly and start small. And so we're building it through the process of looking at one business unit, but looking at it as an enterprise solution, building out a repeatable and scalable process to first and foremost address their data challenges that then will evolve and be able to master and scale and then ultimately improve business decisions. So this is something that they're looking for and that we're working through with them. We're transforming the entire culture in how they view data. So data at the beginning of our journey was never a consideration. It was an afterthought. Today, it's all about the data, and it's all about understanding the journey and where they're headed. So as they look at where they're at, we built out a data compliance profile. We help them to achieve that minimally, but that's not where you stop. You continuously evolve so that you can work within the environment and work to move forward on a regular basis and also build it throughout the enterprise. So we built a near-term design, a process to identify data quality issues and those gaps, address them quickly, while putting forward a long-term targeted goal that will help look at them not only just in transmission asset, but also across the enterprise for all promising technologies and the strategic direction for targeted outcomes from leadership. With that, I'll pass it over to Dinad, who will help walk us through a consumer products example. Dinad?
Thank you, Melanie, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So another example we'd like to talk about today is a global consumer products company. So they had already launched a pilot, done a minimal viable product for what's called a sales recommendation engine. So if you imagine a consumer products company, they want to make sure that their the stock levels, where are the opportunities, and how can we, as the consumer products company, make the right recommendations to the retailers to say, hey, here there's an upsell opportunity and such. So you really need to have that real-time data and use the analytics to find the recommendations for that specific store at a specific SKU stock keeping unit level. But taking one step back, so they've already done this minimal viable product, shown that it's working, but it's all about scaling. It's all about making sure that you can bring this into production and leverage these capabilities for the entire organization. Now, the late Stephen Covey, the author and businessman, had as a second habit of highly effective people, begin with the end in mind. And having the end in mind here is looking at the business goal that you want to achieve, but also what is the next steps before doing that. So it's all empowering the sales force of this company. So that's why it's not just about the data and the analytics and the architecture behind that, but it's also looking at the overall user experience, all the user interface that the sales force uses and such. So that's why in this entire effort of bringing this to life, it was about the data engineering part, the data science part, bringing in the right data sources, but also looking at how do you make this workable? How do you make the user experience optimal for the sales force? So end of the day, that solution was all about, bringing the power of the data to a tablet that they would bring into the store that they could even scan at SKU level for specific products to show the retailer what product it was and such. And through that, really making it an easy and also enjoyable experience for that sales force. So in a matter of a few months, we were able to actually scale this MVP to production level solution, roll it out in North America, and already achieve an incredible return on investment just in that first year. So that's a crucial thing when designing these types of solutions. Don't just look at, where's the possibility, but also how do you scale it in the long term? And one of the questions that was asked by the audience is, how do you start this kind of journey if you have different levels of maturity? Because having a pilot or doing a proof of concept is one, scaling it up is another question. But where do you start this journey is something entirely different. And for that, actually, we have an approach whereby our insights and data team, together with our strategy consulting partners, Capgemini, Invent, work together with what we call an AI and data activate journey. And activating this journey really starts at different levels, but it can also start at different parts of the companies. So first of all, it's about the mobilization. And there we leverage this framework and methodology to develop a vision and a roadmap that's connected to the business strategy. That, by the way, can be very different for different parts of the company. The HR department, or the finance function, or the marketing function, or the sales function, or the supply chain function, they can all be at different levels of maturity within the same organization. So sometimes you take a holistic view across the organization. Sometimes you zoom in on a specific area. Really, so designing that transformation roadmap and then selecting the use cases which have one, high business impact, and at the same time are also easily scalable. Because, if you really, one client of ours said, well, it's great to do a pilot, but we really almost need to free the data from Fort Knox to be able to use it. Well, if that's a challenge you have every day, it might be better to start with other use cases that are more easy to scale. So once you have these use cases and these roadmap and such, you can start implementing some pilots, then scaling them up. But once you get further into your journey, you probably want to institutionalize certain capabilities as well. So then it's really, we have these tools in this playbook for repeatability and reusability. So really AI and analytics scaling, organization, process, and all of the tools that you need for that. And at the end of the day, it's also about the people. So there we also look at the skills part of it, and we have an AI and analytics academy that really helps the business people become more data literate, and the data people become more business literate in terms of understanding the business value, and also offering them lots more training in the fields of new technical tools. What are the AI capabilities and such. And finally, it's all about really powering innovation within organizations. So really having an extended ecosystem and assets to accelerate business innovation at speed and scale throughout this continuous journey. So that's a little bit of how we approach that in general. And with this specific client in this consumer products industry, this roadmap continues as well, starting with the solution that there's now. Suddenly, the business users see the potential, and there's this roadmap of future functionality, future use cases that can be built on top of that. So it never ends, because once you get this journey going, the appetite increases, the business value is demonstrated, and then you create this backlog of future use cases to create even more business value. With that, I'd like to hand over to Gotham for another use case from the high-tech sector. Gotham? Gotham,
sorry,
I think you still might be on mute.
Yep. So, hey, like Dinan said and Laura alluded to earlier, we see the biggest problem with many of our large clients in the area of scaling AI. So what we mean by that, in the specific telco example, we had deployed the AI use cases, and they had deployed AI use cases across many different business verticals. They had deployed AI use cases in marketing and sales, in commerce, in order provisioning and fulfillment, in operations and repair, in the call center space, in the network space. But the problem the client was having is that they're not able to leverage the network effect of these use cases across the enterprise. In fact, we did an analysis that showed that about 50 to 60% of the energy spent on AI projects was on copying data back and forth between the various silos. Because in order to be effective in the call center, you need to understand what's happening in sales, provisioning, and the operations space. You need to understand about the network. In order for the network to be effective, you need to understand what's happening in the marketing space, in the sales space, in the provisioning space, to get context for that interaction. So what we suggested to the client is, while these AI use cases are useful, let's reduce the amount of energy it takes to activate a use case into operations. So when we did the analysis, we found that that we could save them $250 million. This is for one client, a savings of $250 million over 5 years by consolidating the data asset into a common language, into a common virtual platform. It's yet federated, right? Into a common virtual platform, on one cloud. Their legacy was, they had a mix of Teradata, Hadoop, they had a mix of Amazon, Azure, some Google. They had a mix of tools like SAS, Informatica, and so on and so forth, spread all over the enterprise, leverage in different degrees across, different parts of the organization. We came up with the consolidated map, consolidated on, one cloud provider, had a common storage across all of the different business units, yet, came up with an architecture, a federated architecture in which each business unit could create their own architecture, their own nomenclature on top of this platform. By pulling all that data into a single center of gravity of data, while ensuring the security of this data platform, yet giving the autonomy for marketing, for example, to have their definition of a customer with a slight variant from how sales and commerce handles it, for network to have a different view of the customer, for call center to have their own lens on the customer, all on a common data set. We saved 50% of the energy on the back end and saved them $250 million over 5 years. And we see this process, repeat not only in telco, but at many large clients. Many of our large clients in many of the regulatory spaces operate in many different industries. We know theme park operators who have a streaming business. We know insurance companies who have a retail business, right? And many times they tend to operate in silos. We can reduce the cost of operations and increase the velocity of AI and the value of AI by bringing these silos together and activating the use cases in production. So with that, I hand back to Anne-Laure.
Thank you very much, Gautam. So I think we'll try to answer to additional questions now. So I think we answered the first question. So based on your experience, what is the best way for a firm who is immature in their AI adoption to get started on their journey? So we see that we can propose additional frameworks in order for you to know where to start, because it's always difficult to know, okay, where to start small, but don't boil the ocean. Start with a project that will solve a real pain point in your organization. That also has a critical mass for people to recognize the success and become viral in your organization. I was wondering, Jennifer, do you have additional perspective to bring to that first question about where to start, when you don't know where to start, basically? You're on mute, I think. I still can't hear you, unfortunately. I don't know if it's just me.
Okay. Third time's the charm.
Better.
So Danan answered the question when talking about how to address the maturity, but we also at Forrester we talk about, we have a prioritization framework where we look at the different use cases across the organization. And as I mentioned earlier, often the chief data officer in his role as a chief diplomatic officer works very closely with the different business units, the different functional areas to capture what those potential use cases might be, and then apply the framework, the prioritization framework, to understand what mix of longer term, more difficult projects to undertake versus the maybe shorter term, lower hanging fruit projects. And that kind of dovetails with what Melanie was saying earlier about which actually addresses one of the second question about how do I get to ROI much more quickly? How do I get to, you know, we're having trouble getting to value with these projects. And so that's where we suggest that maybe there is an iterative approach to be taken, and working on multiple projects at the same time, where you could potentially have some smaller projects that demonstrate value more quickly, while at the same time working towards those larger projects. The other thing that we see is often companies spend a lot of time getting their data house in order. So focusing on the data itself, focusing on building their catalogs, and focusing on capturing the metadata and putting the right governance policies in place. And if you think that you're going to do all of that up front before starting the AI projects, then you're going to have a lot of frustrated stakeholders, and you are going to have a hard time getting to value quickly. So thinking about this as an iterative approach, define a project, take the time to get the data that you need for that particular project, populate your data catalog, put the governance processes in place, start to build the models and deliver the outcomes, operationalize those. Then you're doing it in an iterative fashion. Then you can start with the next project and add to the catalog that you've already started. So what we find is with some organizations where they're really working on all fronts on the data side to get the catalog up and running and get the data lakes populated, as well as trying to get projects in place, then if they're thinking of it in a linear fashion, it takes too long to get to the value. So it's this iterative approach that Melanie highlighted in her example that gets you to that value more quickly.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer. Should we maybe go to the next question, actually, because I think that's also very complementary. So the next question is about when you struggle with time to value with some of the AI programs, how to speed that up. So, I mean, if I can bring some perspective to that, really look at some, for example, off-the-shelf accelerators. So service providers like us can help you accelerate time to market, because we have done thousands of projects across the world. So we need to reinvent the wheel each time. But also on the other side, it can be tempting to also do some AI projects in-house. But also, success with AI comes faster when you work in partnership with an ecosystem. Bringing back to the nurture topic. And this ecosystem is really composed of, the technology vendors and also specialized companies that again have delivered, past project successfully. You're not alone in this AI game, and you're trying to scale those. Maybe Dinan, do you want to bring some additional perspective to that, or Jennifer, you wanted to jump in? Yes, please go.
Well, I did have something I wanted to say quickly. We find in our surveys that 41% of our respondents tell us that they do work with an insight services provider. So they work with an external provider to help them accelerate their projects, or to help them with their projects. And when we ask what the benefits of working with an insight services provider are, their number one answer is accelerating those projects. So it's clearly that's one of the returns that they're getting from working with that external partner. The second one is probably self-explanatory. It's leveraging that service provider for content and data. So using them for the accelerators, the enterprise or the functional apps that would help them accelerate, or the frameworks that would help them accelerate their AI projects. But what's interesting also are the next three benefits that we see are around having an authoritative external source of advice and guidance to help them basically herd the cats, to help them influence their stakeholders, to help with change management, to help getting their organizational processes in place. So, Anne-Laure, when we talk about operationalizing, and we talked about how do you organize yourself and how do you build out the right processes, often it helps to have that outside perspective in order to change processes, in order to build the organizations, and in order to really evangelize the whole the whole the project, but also the whole culture, the new culture that you're trying to develop with some of the stakeholders involved.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. And to build on that, I mean, and Laura, you were talking about, you don't need to reinvent the wheel, but leverage existing accelerators. So one of the things that we, for example, do is all of these projects that we've done for clients across the entire value chain, we bring these use cases together, put it on a platform we call 890, but it's essentially the collection of all analytics use cases. First of all, that provides a great starting point for ideas. These are cases where clients have already implemented them, whether it's on planning and procurement or production planning or distribution or sales and marketing, whatever the function. It's already a starting point for ideas. So there's the acceleration in terms of the ideation. But also when you want to start implementing it, you don't need to reinvent the algorithm. You can immediately start with the model that's there and then tailor it to the specific needs of a client. So you have the speed to value there. And thirdly, also talking about that ecosystem that Anne-Laure mentioned, a big part of that ecosystem is data providers as well. So you'll have clients' own data, people in their direct supply chain, partners in their supply chain, but also third-party data providers, where we have a lot of providers that we work with, and sometimes it's the art of discovering what has the most value. So for some clients, we work together with 3 or 4 certain parts of third-party data sources, and to see where is the correlation the strongest, which element really helps this specific model. And then in that pilot, we identify that, and when we scale it, we bring that third-party data in, connect it, and then you really get the incremental value from it. So it's combining all of these forces: the ideas, the model, the third-party data, and the organization's own data, and then scaling it quickly.
Thank you, Dinan. So I just wanted to check out if Gautam or Melanie, you wanted to add something to this question, or whether we move to the next one. We have a next question as well to address. Okay.
And Laura, I can talk about the tools if that makes sense. Sure. Yeah. So yeah, and Laura, as you can see, I'm not on camera today because my camera is still stuck, in a previous meeting with Teams. So the question about tools is very similar, right? So when you bring many ecosystems to play, they don't always play nicely together. In order for me to transition to Teams, I need to reboot my computer so that GoToMeeting can take control of my camera. So the question on tools is very similar. Our recommendation to our clients is that it's twofold. One is every single product that you interact with is going to have an AI component within it. If you go with the marketing product, it's going to have AI built into it. If you go with the commerce product, like Salesforce or something, it's going to have AI built into it. If you buy a machine today, right, it's unavoidable that it has AI built into it for predictive maintenance. So when we spoke to one of our clients, they asked us the exact same question in the case of the predictive maintenance stuff, and said, in a ship, they have algorithms from about 5 different manufacturers running predictive maintenance on it, but they have no visibility into predictive maintenance. So what is the right answer? So in my opinion, the right answer is, as much as possible, the 80-20 rule. Try to do 80% of your AI use cases on a common analytic platform, understanding that at the edge, at the point of execution, it is non-optional to have operational AI that is adjacent to the tool that you're buying. As much as possible, when you reduce sprawl, you will see the acceleration of value. We gave you the example of Rogers, where every silo spun up their own AI initiative, and they spend 60% of the energy copying data back and forth. So coming back to summarize, try to put as much as possible on a central core so you can express value, so reduce the amount of diversity in the ecosystem, but understanding that it's non-optional to have a hybrid approach to have variations at the edge. And Laura, back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, if I can build on what you just said, Gautam, so in any case, the pace of innovation, on AI and the number of AI solutions and startups and scale-ups that you have out there is absolutely staggering. And actually, we also have, on our Capgemini side, to go through this exercise ourselves to ensure that when we partner with, with these companies, with the right startups and scale-ups, we conduct an assessment on whether this is viable or not. And two things, if I can share in particular, that we look at when we assess those companies, and to ensure that we can bring them into a broader solution scope, beyond, of course, their financial stability and geographical coverage. So first of all, what is the status really of their partnership with hyperscalers? If they partner and have a way to integrate, that's usually a good sign. If on the contrary, they are trying to outcompete, that's usually more problematic, as usually they do not really have a comparable level of resources, and they risk to be replaced by hyperscaler services that will become more and more integrated and easily accessible over time. And second, what is the interoperability of their solution? And back to your point, Gotham, if the solution requires you to create yet another data silo to copy data back and forth, this should be a warning for you. So not necessarily a complete showstopper, but consider the bigger picture. If you bring them in, does the added value compensate the increased complexity that it will add to your data landscape? And consider whether it might limit future usage of certain data assets, because it might be very good to add them, for a specific use case, but think also down the line if it will not limit also your ability to reuse and to democratize these data assets. Anything else in particular, Dinan or Jennifer, that you want to add to that?
And I just add one thing is a component of that is just bringing in the client on the journey. So one of the things that we did is that we didn't go off and just suggest something or start implementing something because that was what we thought was best. We actually brought in the client on the journey as a partner now, and helping to build literacy and upskilling not only just within the environment, but also each of those team members that were involved. And then we learned early on that not everybody speaks data and analytics. They have an impression or they have an understanding of what that might mean to them, but it's not universal. So then we had to begin to say, okay, let's speak data. Let's say what it will do and will not do. And so that was a game changer in helping to drive that. So simple modes of media, a newsletter, just helping to build the literacy around what this is. And it began to become immersed and more of a social norm, and then more got engaged, and then they understood better about their roles and what their accountability would be in the journey as well. So I think that that's an important component.
So Melanie mentioned data literacy again, and I wanted to touch back on that, particularly related to data quality. One of the things that we found in our research is so our data literacy framework, when we talk about data literacy at Forrester, it addresses, like I said, not just the experts, but also the decision makers, but also everyone in the organization. And one of the things we've found is that there are many people in the organization who don't realize that they touch data. We did a qualitative survey where we asked an online panel, do you work with data? Are you comfortable with data? And what kinds of training would you like to improve your ability to work with data? We really thought that the third question was going to be the most interesting. We thought we were going to hear a lot about people's preferences with regard to training. But we got answers like, I don't work with data. I don't do anything with numbers. My team isn't responsible for calculations. And that really just struck us as, wow, these people don't necessarily recognize what data is today and what it means to the organization, let alone what their role is with regard to it. And just a quick anecdote to put that into perspective, I was talking to the chief digital officer of a large food services company, and she was telling me that when they started looking at their data over time, they started seeing an increase in the sale of breakfast sausage in one of their cafeterias, to the point where no one was buying anything else. And that was obviously a very odd finding. It was in France, and people don't really eat breakfast sausage, and Laura can attest to that. But what they found was that shift corresponded to an update to their cash registers to point of sale machines with single buttons for for each individual item. And it turns out that the easiest button to press, the closest one to total, was breakfast sausage. So if you'd ask these cashiers if they worked with data, they would have probably said, no, I don't have any, I don't do data. I'm not, I don't do anything to do with numbers. But in fact, they were capturing the data that was going to be used down the line to replenish the stocks or forecast the stocks and to get an understanding of what their customers wanted. And so that to me was really just a wake-up call that data literacy programs need to focus not just on the expert or even just on the decision makers, but really think about everyone in the organization and how they touch data and really imparting on them the importance of every role in the organization with regard to data.
Yeah, I mean, Jennifer, to build on that, indeed, what we sort of term advocacy and adoption, this whole educational journey that we go on with clients is crucial, because it's about the use cases, but it's also having that end in mind, and part of that is the people that you work with. So they're also, if you look at it from a more strategic perspective, you look at the use cases, you look at how you're going to achieve that, how you're going to scale that, and this data literacy as well as this business literacy from the data side is crucial. And so that's something that in that whole journey and that whole roadmap that we focus on, what I call the activation journey, really defining that strategy. In that phase 0 that you're working on, look at what are all the elements that you need to address: technology, people, processes, all those sorts of things, and build that advocacy and adoption into the entire program, like Melanie was describing.
Yeah, I think just to again make that point is that what we found, Jennifer, just what you're saying is that when we were trying to map process back to data elements, particularly critical data elements, we had stakeholders tell us, I don't need this, I know what my data is. But then when we begin to take that deep dive, they started using words like, well, I don't know what that data element is. We have gremlins, or we're not sure, we have orphans. Well, how do you use this data element? Well, I'm not sure, but it just comes in the spreadsheet. So what we found is that they really didn't know deeply what the data elements did or how they were using it. It was just becoming more of owning a task versus owning the result.
I think, and Laura, we also, for the people, for the audience, there's a few links at the side as well with some documents that provide some interesting reading specifically on this. The research report you were referring to on the data-powered enterprise, how do you approach such a roadmap, the phase 0, the entire strategic perspective. So I don't know whether it's there or there, but interesting reading for after the webinar.
Yes, absolutely. So we have just a few minutes left. I think Gotham, you wanted to bring some additional perspective also on data quality, but maybe I will close. Just one additional example, bringing back to what you were just saying, Melanie. I remember a client case where basically the lack of business metadata in order to really describe what the data asset was about actually led to a funny example. So I think it was actually in a credit card company where basically there was a file that was named high value customers, but it so happened that this file was actually produced by the debt recovery department, except that it fell into the marketing department. And of course, the definition of a high value customer for a debt recovery department is absolutely not the same for a marketing department. So that tells you, when you think about data quality, especially, when you're doing mission critical projects like you could with artificial intelligence and machine learning, think really about those good old topics around data governance and data quality, because it can lead you to some awkward results in terms of how you exploit the data. So I think we have just 1 minute left. I see our teams have posted for you again, some links in order for you to follow up. Happy to answer any additional questions that all of you might have. Feel free to contact us. Very happy to engage with you. And with that, I would like to thank all of our speakers today and also the organization team for this very interesting webinar with very live discussions on how to scale AI throughout the organizations for success. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day ahead.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Anne-Laure.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.